Yo, yo, yo. I'm Candy B. I be knitting. And today I thought I'd be starting by showing y'all some spinning because I haven't shown y'all my spinning in a while. Mostly because I have been working on the same fiber for a very long time. And it's a pound of dyed Corriedale I got from R.H. Lindsay. And um, I finally finished all of the single plies and now I'm making a 3-ply yarn out of it. And today I got 2 bobbins of what will probably be at least 5 to 6 4-ounce bobbins of fiber plied today. Squish, squish. This fiber gave me a bit of heartburn. Here you go. It's their comb top, and what do you call that? I ordered it to be a main color in a Wintersol by Jennifer Steingass, and I decided to just go ahead and just spin it all because the last time I made a sweater, I ended up having to go back and spin a little bit more to get enough yarn. So this way I should have more than enough. But I bought some comb top from RH Lindsay, and this is like machine mass produced comb top. So it was very not matted, not felted. Here's a better view of it. But very compact. And so it was not very smooth to draft. And I'm used to buying like indie dyed, hand prepped, hand painted comb top that is usually pretty like I take it out of the braid and just go for it. Usually just needs a little bit of like fluffing up to kind of get some air in it. But this, I was like, oh, it's comb top. Just starts, I do a short forward draw and, or, worsted style drafting. And it was just, like I said, really compacted. And it also had kind of like some short little neppy bits in it. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do with this? So the first thing I thought of, I was like, I can run it through my drum carder. But that seems like a lot of extra effort when something was already combed. And in case you don't know, combed is, every fiber is in the same direction. It's very, very smooth. It lends itself very well to a worsted draft. And so I ran a little bit of it through my drum card, and it was still pretty stiff to work with. And this is a bag where I put any like little extra bits from my spinning projects in with the intention of, I create like I only did it 1 year so far, and I got the idea from Jillian Eve, but when you have leftovers from a spinning project, you just put them into this little bag, and then you can do like a big bat or whatever at the end of the year. And so, yeah, I ended up, this is a little bit of it, and it was just really dense to work with, and I just could not get a feel for it. And then lost my train of thought. But yeah, it was really dense. And that's what I was going to say. Sometimes people say like, oh, there's usually one end you can work from versus another end. Very, very long story short, there were 2 major keys of things that I should have, I will do for next time. One is this little guy here is called a Diz, and this is a Triforce Diz. But basically a Diz, you can use any, I just bought it because it was cute and was perfectly themed. I got this from Hip Strings, but some people use a button, just anything with a hole in the middle, and this one has 3 different sized holes. And it comes with this little kind of almost like a giant needle threader, and you pull fiber through and it drafts the fiber for you, and this is used for combed fibers. So after you comb the fibers to get how they get from combing it, and you have all the fibers on a comb to a long braid, is usually pulling it through a Diz. But it also helps as a drafting tool, and then you can kind of pick the size of how thin you want to draft it. So this helped a lot, and it helped get a lot of those short bits out. And the other thing I did, that I usually do when my fiber is more like felted. I ran my steamer over it, and that made a big difference. And it just kind of, you can, if you have never done this before and you have fiber around in your spinner, it's same as blocking with a steamer. You can immediately see a difference. Like all the fibers just kind of like they're tense and then they just kind of relax. So those were two big things that from the first 50 grams that I was kind of sampling with, and then thinking like, okay, how am I gonna do a pound of this? The Diz and the steamer were very important for that. And so I spun it all up, and then I have 4 bobbins that go with my Ashford traditional, and we're talking 4-ounce bobbins, and we're talking 1 pound of yarn on 4-ounce bobbins. There we go. And so, of course, I had to get the yarn off of the bobbins in order to continue to spin, because the other thing, because this is such a big project, I do all of the single plies first, and then when I go to ply, I take the oldest ply, which is the one that I was struggling with, and the fibers were all compacted. Also, maybe my body's a little bit more tense because I'm working with it, so I'm maybe drafting a little bit thinner or pedaling a little bit faster. And then you have the very, very last last bobbin I did, where I was a little bit more maybe relaxed because my fiber was working with me, but also my wheel, I had to start fighting with my wheel a little bit towards the end, because at this point it needs to be oiled. I had to take all the bobbins and clean them in between, and re-oil them in between this whole spin. So very long story short, I take all of those plies, and I'm doing a 3-ply, so I kind of mix them all up so that it kind of distributes any inconsistencies over the whole spin, to each of the final yarns. And so I am not a machine. I do not, spin perfectly balanced, perfectly uniform yarn. And so that kind of helps distribute any, like I said, any discrepancies. And so I've got 2 bobbins so far. I've got a few more to go. I always, to me, plying to spinning is a lot like weaving in ends is to knitting. Like I'm just like, oh, I've spun up all these singles. All I got to do is ply them. That's not going to take me any time at all. And literally it took me probably a good 3 to 4 hours to do these 2 bobbins today. I thought I was going to be able to finish all of the yarn today. And maybe if I had started at, sunrise, but even so, it's not really good for my body to sit there and ply a pound of yarn. But yeah, it always takes a little bit longer than I anticipate. And also I like to, similar to weaving in yarns and doing all the finishing work on my knitting, when I'm finishing my spinning, I don't want to throw it all away at the end, because I've spent literally at least 6 months spinning all of these singles. And so I'm like, let me really do a good job plying and take my time plying. Like sometimes I really want to pedal through that and just get it done, but that's going to completely betray all of that work I just did. So I'm like, okay, let me just I did a couple of bobbins today. Let me relax, maybe do 1 tomorrow, 1 Sunday. And then, we have the 4 bobbins. So I'll have to wind these off onto a nitty naughty to finish plying it. But I'm just like, chill out. So that's where my head is at today. That was the big thing I did today. I didn't really do much of any knitting today because I was, and I just make little center pull balls and ply off of those. Eventually, I would like to. I need to play around with. I just have the Lazy Kate, the thing that you put all of your bobbins on, that came with my wheel, and eventually I do want to play around with tensioning that, and maybe doing some plying off of the bobbins. Because, I've always been told, you should, if you're doing worsted, especially if you're doing worsted, but in general, because you start on the beginning of this yarn is on the inside of the bobbin. And so I'm spending the whole time smoothing it this way. And so after I finish apply, I rewind those balls and I start at the same end again so that I'm constantly smoothing in the same direction. And that makes sense to me. That's conventional wisdom. That's how I was taught. But then I also sometimes do center pull balls and do two plies off of center pull balls. So I'm literally going the opposite direction on one of the plies. And so I'm just like, would it be the worst? It just is an experiment for myself. I would be interested to see what a 3-ply would look like, a worsted prep, and starting at the wrong end. Just some of my thoughts on my spinning. On to knitting. I do have a finished object. These are my Rye Socks by TinCanKnits. And this yarn is called Dyeing for Art. And it's a dyer that's local to me because the only way I've seen to get this yarn is she does a trunk show annually at my local yarn store, Dance with Wool. And I got this a few years ago. I don't remember the colorway anymore. I don't think she repeats colorways. And I had knitted these into a pair of socks for myself. And the socks were like one of the first pairs of socks I had made, and they were too baggy on me, and I didn't ever wear them. And so I ended up frogging them and washed the yarn. And I had half a ball left because I had made fingering weight socks for myself, mid calf fingering weight socks for myself. And so I had half of that yarn left, and so I ended up holding the yarn double. So one strand was already used ramen yarn, and the other strand was fresh, never used yarn. And the yarn had gotten a little bit faded because they were socks and I did wear them, just not a lot, and so they did get a little worn, like on the bottom, and had some friction spots on them. Overall, the yarn still was in pretty good condition, but I thought to kind of balance that look out, to use some of that fresh yarn and kind of lend some strength to some yarn that may not be as strong as it originally was. And these are the Rye Socks by TinCanKnits. It's their like ubiquitous free sock pattern, and so there's a fingering weight all the way through a worsted weight pattern for babies through adults. And the distinguishing feature of these socks is this garter stitch panel on the front of the socks. And so I usually do mostly like vanilla socks, just whatever ribbing I'm feeling that day, and just stockinette. So I thought this would be a fun thing to kind of add to my repertoire. Not super practical for me because, one, these are technically DK weight socks, two fingering held double, and they have this texture on them. So I don't think these are going to be like in sneakers socks. They're going to be more like house socks, or I have like some big gardening boots that these could probably fit into, or if I had snow boots, these would probably go into these. But just added some interest, and also I think it's good for if you're knitting for someone and you're not quite sure on their foot size. The garter panel has a bit of a tighter gauge on it than the stockinette, and so it kind of brings in the sock a little bit more, makes it a bit snugger. So you can maybe like go up a size for a person, but it's going to still fit them because the garter stitch kind of keeps the structural integrity of the sock. Mostly knit these to pattern. The only thing I did differently, I go down a needle size on my socks just because I like a tighter gauge. And so what I have here are 2.5 millimeter knitting needles that I used for the ribbing. And usually I just use zeros for my whole sock, but I was like, oh, I'm following a pattern, I'll do a size. So I went down a size for the ribbing, and that was 2.5 millimeter. And the pattern calls for 3 millimeter for the ribbing, and then I use my 3 millimeters for the body when the body calls for 3.5 millimeter. And so that was that. And then the other thing with these socks, I think because they're supposed to be kind of their free pattern in TinCanKnits, their whole shtick is giving like really accessible patterns for free to people. And it's usually a lot of people's like first blank that they knit. And in the pattern, they have you do just a stockinette on the heel flap. It's a heel flap and gusset. And the problem I had with the socks that I made the first pair of socks I made a stockinette, just knit one side, purl one side, because when I was reading the pattern, I didn't understand that it was telling me to slip stitches. So it was supposed to be a slip stitch heel flap, and that was one of the problems with the sock, was that the slip stitch heel flap brings in the sock even more and makes it tight around the ankles, and I have a bit narrow ankles, and so the sock felt just extra baggy in that area from like the heel to the, I wouldn't say I have like I don't wear narrow shoes, like formally narrow, but my foot is on the thinner side and my ankle is on the thinner side, so I just need a little bit more grip in that area. And so I did not want to relive that after frocking a pair of socks, so I did a slip stitch heel on the sock instead of following their instructions for the heel flap. But that's the nature of socks. Any sock pattern you can kind of copy and paste and move things. You could put in a short row heel if you were feeling jiggy or what have you. And so that's the only thing I really did differently here, and fits like a glove. I'm very happy with this. I did weigh these socks, and the socks came out to 101 grams, and so I was very tight on yarn, but I did have, these are my ends, and then these are the two little nuggets of yarn I have left over. One from, this was the OG leftovers, and then this was the yarn I had to frog. And so I'm guessing these were either a very generous skein to be over 100 grams, or I've heard that sometimes the act of dyeing yarn can make it weigh a little bit more. And so even if you get a brand new skein of yarn and it's supposed to be 100 grams and it's like 102, 103 grams, sometimes it was 100 grams before they dyed it, and then after they dyed it went up by 2 or 3 grams depending on how they were dyed. Just something I didn't know when I first started knitting. Quite happy with these. Would knit again. Maybe as like I would probably do like the worsted one and maybe do that for like gifts or something like that. But I think I'll stick to just my vanilla socks in general, or if I did venture out into socks, I do want to do some color work socks. But for this purpose and to try the Rye pattern, that's done. And so after that was done, I moved on to my next kind of out and about project. I cast on another free pattern, one of my favorite free patterns, the Sockhead hat by Kelly McClure, aka Bohoknits. And this is knitted with sock yarn, which is 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon. The color is wood violet, and it's got pinks and purples and blues. 420 yards per 4 ounces, and not that far around yet. Starts at the bottom. You do 2x2 ribbing, and then you knit forever, and then you do some decreases and bind up. Very simple pattern. It comes out to be like more of I'm doing the extra large size because I got a big old noggin and I'm a tight knitter, so I'm doing the biggest size, and it's just going to be like I'm in no rush forever type project. I did realize as I was casting this on that last year for Mother's Day, Mr. Rulu took my kids to the yarn shop, and they each picked out a ball of yarn for me, and one of my kids picked out this yarn. And as I'm recording it today, this coming Sunday is Mother's Day again, and so it was kind of serendipitous that I cast on my Mother's Day yarn on Mother's Day weekend. I have knitted this hat. This will be my 4th time knitting this hat, and I've also done the Sockhead cowl. I own the Sockhead cowl, and I've made the Sockhead hat as gifts for people. And it's also one of those patterns that if I'm like knitting a hat, I go and look at that pattern to kind of reference if I'm trying to like figure out stitch counts and gauges and stuff. And I've not knitted one for myself, and I want one for myself. And it's a good pattern for like yarns like this. As I'm knitting with this, I'm like, oh, I wish I had more of this, because I love this. These are like so my colors. Like my kid really gets me. And I'm like, oh, I wish I had like a whole sweater of this yarn. But I will have a hat, and so it's a really good project if you have like those little precious single skeins that don't really go with anything else. I'm enjoying working with the yarn. It's an 80-20 base. I'm more used to like a 75-25 base, so it's like really kind of plump and soft. I would still maybe use it for socks. It doesn't feel like delicate in a soft way. More just like just pleasant to work with. I have to be careful shouting out dyers, because it feels like every single time I mention a dyer, they go out of business. So shout out to Knit It Wit. Hopefully they're doing well wherever they are. This was one of those brands. I don't know if it's like hot anymore, but I remember when I started knitting, this was one of my coveted brands. Like, oh, I would love to use some of that. And then my kid went and got me some. So yes, this is going to be just a nice little piece for me, and I'll have a special hat at a special yarn. I'll have a nice lightweight hat for all seasons. I knit the Sockhead cowl, and at the time my hair was much bigger, and so sometimes I pull that over my head and use it as like a head covering hat. But now with my hair shorter, I've been wanting more hats. My head's a bit colder, and this one should fit just fine over my head and hair as it is now. So that's that. Yeah, this will just kind of be, you probably won't see this again for a few months, because this is going to be like my, oh, I'm going to this place, or, you know, I told you I have a trip coming up with my kids. This will probably be what I take with me and just kind of work on it as I need to. And I'm familiar with the pattern. I've done it a few times, so it should be easy peasy. Then the other thing I wanted to get y'all caught up on is my blanket project. I was working with some funky yarns, and I was getting frustrated, and then I pivoted, and I came to confirm that my pivot was spot on. It was exactly what I needed. So I have this bulky superwash Knit Picks yarn, Wool of the Andes, and this mystery acrylic yarn, and I am now holding them double for the Happy Baby blanket by Lion Brand. There's no name on the, it literally is just on the Lion Brand website. There's a knit version and a crochet version, and it's mitered squares. The blanket is made for homespun yarn, which is a bulky yarn, and I'm knitting two bulky yarns together on 10mm needles, and so this is more like a super bulky, and so I'm kind of just using the pattern as it was an inspiration. Like I started off with some homespun yarn. I was gonna make it normal. So the pattern, and this is a free pattern, you just have to be willing to give Lion Brand your email address. So the pattern has like 4 blocks, and you cast on 40 stitches for each of these squares, and then you end up with 4 big blocks. And so what I did, because I wanted to work with this yarn on wooden needles, because my metal needles were annoying me. And so what I did is I was just like, okay, I'm just going to do, if the pattern calls for, oh, actually that's wrong. The pattern calls for 80 stitches. I knew that didn't sound right. The pattern calls for 80 stitches. So I cast on 40 stitches. And so when this is all said and done, this is going to be a pretty different blanket, but same concept. And so I'm just going to knit up all of these squares until I'm done with this yarn. There's no requirement around, this is purely for my own enjoyment to have a project, because I have like a fingering weight hat that's for out and about. I have my other big project that I'm going to show y'all in a second, that I'm like my investment, like I am in this project, but this is more of like, oh, just when I have time. It takes me literally, I cast on one square in an afternoon and I work on it for a little bit, and then the next day I finish the square. So I could probably do a bunch of squares in one day, but I don't really, there's no rush around this. This was the intention, is to make a blanket for my sister-in-law. But I'll just see what happens when I have all of the squares done. It might be enough to make, Mr. Rulu has two Swisters. He has two sisters, so I might be able to get, matching blankets for them. But I'm just going to knit. If I run out of yarn, that's the other thing about doing smaller squares. I have more of an opportunity to make as many squares as I want. And then if I need more yarn for seaming, I have so much yarn behind me that I could use to seam the blanket together. I don't necessarily have to use the same exact yarn to seam it. I have a few kind of like long tails that I could use for seaming, but like the way this textured acrylic yarn is, I wouldn't necessarily seam with this, and so I might just get like a ball of some other type of acrylic yarn and use that for seaming. But first I'm going to knit everything I got and then start doing the squares and see how things line up and how they look. And then of course I would wash and block all of these before I seam them together. So that's that. The next project I want to check in with y'all is my Pie Maker apron by Jennifer Lysen. And I'd cast this on and really was going ham with it because I was doing those washcloths and I was like, oh, I just really enjoying working with the cotton. And then I kind of fell off with it. And then this week I was working in the kitchen and I was just like, I actually, like, it was like, oh, it's an apron. It's kind of a silly thing, but I was like, I kind of do want my apron. So I did start picking it up again this week. I'm almost done with it. I am really bad at holding things up. I don't know why I do things the most awkward way possible. I'm almost done with the body of the apron. You're supposed to knit this front piece. This is a free pattern, by the way. You're supposed to knit this front piece to 18 inches. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to knit until I run out of this yarn. I'm on my third ball of this scented sugar and cream yarn. Because the way the pattern has stripes all down the front. I'm just using variegated yarn. So the pattern this is all striped, and then the band is in a third color. So it takes 3 colors altogether. I'm doing 2 colors. So this is going to be all one color. And then when I finish, I'm looking at 2 balls. I might do this color. I might do this color. I think I'm leaning towards this color. And then it also has little pockets on it, and I'm just going to use some scrap yarn for my pockets. The only thing I did different here is mine is much narrower than the pattern calls for, because the ruffle down here, she creates with knit 2-togethers, and when I knit mine and I cast on the amount of stitches for the pattern, and then I did knit 2-togethers, the ruffle wasn't as ruffly as I wanted it to be, and I was like, oh, the whole point of this is that I want a ruffly apron. And so I ripped mine back and I did knit 3-togethers, but it also decreased the stitch count. So I have I'm rather like straight sized. I'm like a 10-12 in women's clothes. So this kind of just covers the front of me. So depending on how, wide your hips are, think about, just covering the front is okay for me. And I haven't measured this yet, and I'm assuming once I block it, I can stretch it out this way if I want it to be wider. But that's fine for me. I also imagine if you're more, this is for me to dry my hands on in the kitchen, but if you really wanted to protect your clothes, I imagine you would want it to be a bit wider so it really wraps around your lower half. But I'm not in the kitchen literally making pies. It's mostly I wash my hands, and I'm like, the other day I was like cooking raw chicken, and I was just like, I pulled the chicken out, I'm cutting up the chicken, then I need to wash my hands to get my other utensils, and then I need to touch the chicken again, and then I need to and so I'm like, this is going to be like just perfect for that use. but it's not to necessarily protect my clothes or anything like that. And so I don't mind it being just a flap in the front. And then, like I said, you knit this whole panel and then you cast on stitches and work a nice little belt. I don't know if I'll have to make any changes to the belt yet. We'll see. So that's that. And then last but certainly not least is my big boy project, my kind of like focus time project. And that is my silver bells, also by TinCanKnits. I just like TinCanKnits. The pattern, well, this pattern is not free, but they have a lot of free patterns. They have their app. You're not going to be, this is not an optimal way of showing this because it's on small needles and it's mohair held double with fingering weight yarn held, and it's variegated finger weight yarn. So I don't think you're going to see any stitch definition. But it's a top down, you cast on a double knit neckband. Then you go into a lace shirt with bobbles. This is my first time doing bobbles. I'm liking the bobbles. This is Beacon Mohair. It's a mohair acrylic blend, and I'm holding it with some Lion brand Sock Ease yarn. And this is it so far. The big story with this week is I cast this on, and conventional wisdom will tell you read the whole pattern before you start a project. I do read. I read the the pattern, and so like I'm reading it, and then I'm kind of like, okay, I get what's going on here. Let's cast on. Or I read it and I don't have like a reference point because I haven't made it before, so I don't really know what I'm looking for, and so it doesn't always. It's definitely better than not even looking at the pattern before starting, but I thought, I was like, okay, I get it. That's fine. Let's move on. But I was just like, something, and then I started making it. I was like, something feels off. And I read the instructions and I'm like, okay, I'm doing the pattern. I'm doing everything right. Spoiler alert, I was doing everything right. But I was like, there's something was just bugging me. And then I was looking at it and I forget how it dawned on me, but I was like, I looked at the bobbles and I was like, the bobbles start right after the neck. That's weird to me. And then I looked at project pictures and I was like, yeah, the bobbles start right off the neck. I'm doing it right. And then I was just like, I always do short rows in my sweaters. That's the difference here. And the pattern does not have short rows. Short row shaping is, making, putting just a little wedge of fabric on the back so, you're not getting choked by your sweater. And I was just like, that's weird. And the reason it didn't dawn on me is because I've been making the simple sweater by TinCanKnits, and in the app on the simple sweater, when you make it, it literally, the way the TinCanKnits app is set up, you pick all of your choices for the sweater as you're working through it. And so it'll be like, what size are you doing? What yarn are you using? And then I'll be like, are you going to do the short rows? And I'm just like, yes, I'm going to do the short rows, or no, I'm not going to do the short rows. And so I kind of took that for granted and assumed every pattern was, not the best assumption in the world, but I was just like, yeah, surely I'm going to get to a point and they'll be like, oh, pick your short rows, and the way the app is set up, they don't give you the whole pattern up front. They just kind of give you your side, and that's the allure of the app, is that you're just looking at little chunks at a time. And so I was like, surely at some point they're going to bring up short rows. There are no short rows in this project. So I did not want to start over. Like it's not that much knitting, but I just knew I would lose momentum, and it's their pattern. And so I'm assuming that it's going to work out. I looked at the sample pictures, and the sample looks fine on the model. I don't think it looks bad. And I have made this double folded collar before, and it relaxes a lot once it's been blocked. And so I'm hoping that that's the same effect. What I am going to do, though, I'm not going to rip back and do the short. Usually I would do them like right after the collar, and that's how I've always done my short rows. This sweater is top down, and it has a circular yoke with these lace charts. and you split for sleeves, and then you continue the lace into the body and you continue the lace into the sleeves. I already decided I'm not doing that. I have no interest in doing that. I think proportionately for my body, I want the lace to stop, and then I'll separate for sleeves and just do plain sleeves, plain body. With that being said, that means that after I finish the lace charts, I can put in short rows after the yoke, which I've not done before, but I believe will give me the effect I'm looking for. And it'll be an opportunity to try it and see if it works. The main downside to that, the from what I've read, is that you're just working with more stitches. And so short rows are usually short rows are knit flat, and you're creating a wedge of fabric, and it's usually from anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of extra fabric. And you can get 1 to 3 inches of extra fabric pretty quick up here where the stitch count is rather low. Down here, the stitch count's going to be like 200, and I'm going to be working probably a third of those. That's usually how I do. I need to grab some books and do some references, but I'm thinking I'm going to take a third of the stitches and go back and forth, and going back and forth for 3 inches on, what is it, a third of 280 stitches is more than 90 stitches. 100, yeah, something like that. Going back and forth on that many stitches is going to take a little bit longer, but we'll see. It's an opportunity to do something I have not done before. We'll see if I still feel like doing it once I finish the yoke. I think I will, just to see what that looks like. But just an interesting choice by them not to put short rows in this pattern. Interesting. I am enjoying it so far. I think it's because I just did that big lace shawl, and so my brain is just in lace mode, and so it's just like, oh, okay, boom, 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 and I can and it's charted, and so charts are just like, if you've never done charts I know like there's certain things that intimidate people, but the charts, I'm just like, oh, once I see the picture of what I'm doing, it's like very obvious where I need to be. And if my stitch count gets off, it's like, oh, I immediately recognize that it's not matching the picture. And all I'm doing is kind of like, pattern recognition and, just making this one repeat look the way it needs to look. And I immediately know, like, okay, I was one stitch off here, and then I need to be, one stair step up here, and I'm making like, a little diamond. And that's what I do. I put a stitch marker at every repeat so that I can keep track of things that way, and then I can easily put it down and walk away from it. And so far so good. Like I said, I am leaning towards doing the short rows at the bottom of the yoke, one, to see how that works for me, if it's something I want to do in the future on other sweaters, and to, like I said, to make sure it fits properly. The last thing I want to show y'all is a little acquisition. I record these on Fridays, but so last weekend, which is almost a week ago, my local library has a sale every year. It's like Friends of the Library put on this book sale, and the library, they either sell old books that they're taking out of circulation, and they also take donations, and sometimes the donations don't necessarily fit in with what the library is doing, and so then they'll have books that just people have donated for the library sale. And the books, I got pretty much a dozen books for $12. They were all different prices. Like all the kids' books were like 50 cents, and I think the most expensive adult book was like $5. And one of the books I got is this bad boy. This book is called The Weaving, Spinning, and Dyeing Book by Rachel Brown, and it was published in 1973. I believe this book is still being published, and it's in it from my Googles. This is it's in its 14th edition, and so pretty popular book. And they didn't really have a lot of knitting books. They had a lot of quilting books. I'm not a quilter, but not a lot of knitting books. And so when I saw this, I grabbed it, even though it's not specifically knitting, it's weaving. From what I understand, from Googling her, she is no longer in this mortal coil with us. She died in 2012, I want to say, but really prolific. I'm assuming some of y'all must have heard of her before. From when I was Googling her, I was like, oh, she's kind of a big deal. Educated in New York, settled in the American Southwest, prolific weaver, spinner, and dyer. And so her mission was to write a book that had everything a weaver might need to know in one book. And so she's a weaver, but then she put in the spinning and the dyeing into the book so that, weavers would have like their encyclopedia. I am not a weaver. I spin and I knit, and I sometimes dye yarn and fiber. Will I ever weave? Probably. Will I buy a loom just because it looks fancy and I appreciate good woodwork? Maybe. And so I'm not mad at it. And there's maybe 20 chapters in this book, and the first 15 of them are literally, each chapter is a different weaving technique. So it takes you through a Navajo loom, backstrack loom, just really simple vocabulary, all the way up to like finishing techniques, working with selvages, all of this, anything you would need to know about weaving. Then the last few chapters, there's a chapter on spinning, there's a chapter on dyeing, there's a chapter on how to make money selling your craft, and then there's a chapter of like resources, which you can imagine from 1973, a lot of the places have either gone out of business or pivoted or what have you. But then a lot of them are like Clems and Clems in Pinole, California. They still make spinning tools and fiber arts tools. A few pictures, mostly hand-drawn pictures, if you can imagine these crafting books from this time period. The thing that intrigues me most is she has a chapter on dyeing, and she has dyeing with natural ingredients, and doing, I guess you could say, more organic materials, and then dyeing with acid dyes. And she gives you recipes, which are always helpful to me to have, and like proportions and stuff like that. And probably my favorite thing is there's a few color most of them are hand drawings, her own hand drawings, by the way. But then she also has some color pictures. Unfortunately, as soon as I came home, the spine fell off the book, and so I'll have to craft that one up. But there is like this picture in here. Ooh, this is really falling apart. And she has all of these fibers lined up, and then there's a picture in here that identifies each. This is the acid dye page. There's one for natural yarn, and then there's one for acid dyes, and it tells you what the color of each of these are and how she got that color. And then there's a page that has all of her fibers that she spun, a skein of yarn with each fiber, and it shows you side by side what all the different fibers look like. So I thought that was pretty cool. Maybe if I get into weaving, I'm a reader. I'm a person that loves to learn new things. And so, I've just been having a fun time reading the little chapters out of here, and especially fascinating to me to read about a different place in time. So I hope y'all will humor me just a little bit longer, because I wanted to share some of the stuff out of here. I wasn't even thought of in 1973. My parents didn't know each other in 1973, and I know my demographic on these videos skew a little bit older. And so if you remember 1973, if you were knitting, spinning, weaving, working in the fiber arts in 1973, let me know in the comments. But I wanted to share, there's two things that stuck out. There's a chapter on spinning, and there's a couple things that stuck out to me. One, there was, she talks about the different type of wheels you can get, and one of the suggestions and one of the headers are homemade wheels. And she says there's no reason why you cannot make a very good spinning wheel if you are a good craftsman and engineer. Unless you are very ambitious, your best bet is to use the wheel itself of an old bicycle wheel. And then she goes into detail about building your own spinning wheel. And then she says, my husband made me a wheel in my beginning days of spinning and weaving, made out of an armature of a Volkswagen. the Volkswagens have a longer shaft than most, and so it was suitable. I don't know if it's because she was a part of a very she lived in Taos, New Mexico, and when I googled this place, it was like, okay, every artist and artist's best friend moved through this place at a certain time. And so I'm just like, maybe she was just a little bit more like that was the world she lived in, where it's like, of course I would build my own spinning wheel. Or in 1973, where people like, yes, I'm not gonna go to, because like her other thing in here is like, oh, you can order a spinning wheel from New Zealand. And so is that, those of you who may remember the 70s and were spinning in the 70s, is that a thing? Like, or is like, I'm thinking we're so removed from a certain skill set. Like in the 70s, was it just like normal that people could take old bicycle wheels and just build amazing things, and we've just lost that skill on the way? Just let me know, because I was just like, that's okay. The other thing that stuck out to me is she goes into electric spinners, which I was surprised to hear about, because I just assumed they were a more modern invention. And she says, my brother-in-law, an amateur inventor and a manager of a paper mill. Once again, it's just like, did she just know these people, or because it's like, oh, we just had jobs like this back in the day, and so people just had this skill set. Built me an electric spinner that is the answer to a spinner's dream. It'll spin any kind of yarn. Blah, 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 blah. The plain spindle is metal, about 12 inches long, and can hold a pound of yarn. When the motor is turned off, the spinner turns freely, allowing me to wind off my skeins. But just the parts of this machine cost over $300. And I just did a quick Google search. In the 1970s, $300 is equal to about over $2,000 in 2025 American dollars. And so that's a lot of money for and today you could buy an e-spinner for $100 if you wanted to. And so she goes into detail, and she talks about how one of her ambitions is to she's in the process of making a prototype of a more affordable e-spinner, and she has like her contact information in this book for when she starts to sell these e-spinners. And so definitely gonna be looking more into that, learning more about Rachel Brown, diving more into this book, into more of it's just fascinating to me, and I hope it's as fascinating to you. If you're watching this video, you probably dig stuff like this. I'm like, who else is looking on YouTube watching knitting videos and spinning videos? People who go to library book sales and buy 1973 weaving books to get into the mind of a very fascinating artist from the 70s. If that is your thing, let me know in the comments. If it's not your thing, let me know that too. Just be like, yeah, I knit a little bit, but nobody wants to hear your nerdy books. Yeah, you can comment down below. You can email me, candibknittin@gmail.com. You can DM me on Instagram. I'm at Rulude on Instagram. I am candibknittin on Blue Sky. I am Rulude on Ko-fi. I'm just everywhere. And if you don't know where to find me, drop in the comments below and we will connect somehow. I have my Ravelry going. I've been trying to update my projects on Ravelry. If you see something and you're like, I don't have Ravelry, or your projects have not been fully updated, don't be afraid to like ask me questions about what I'm working on. If I remember, I will tell you everything that I did on a project. Until next time. Oh, if you are a mother, have a mother, don't have a mother, just have a great Sunday. If you see this before, I don't know if you'll see this before Sunday, but happy Mother's Day to the people who want to hear Happy Mother's Day. Happy Sunday to everybody else. Until next time, peace.